All praise is due to Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. All praise is due to Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. And blessings and peace be upon his messenger Muhammad and upon his family and companions and those who follow him. Sometimes something happens, a certain state comes over us. We enter into a trance. Please don't misunderstand. Sometimes it's gratitude. If anyone misunderstands, they can leave the broadcast. Sometimes we have lessons on truth. Sometimes we have philosophy lessons. Sometimes we have lessons on theology. Sometimes we have lessons on spiritual states. And sometimes we have lessons on Sufism. Right now, the situation is different. So what is the real issue, the real cause? In other words, drawing closer to unity. Knowing and recognizing Allah. Not living life as if it were just air. How will this happen? We will focus on this. Where did we leave off? On veils, on barriers. In other words, there were veils between us and Allah. They said this, but what does it mean? What is it about? We can't understand it. You said we will talk about them. Yes. So, about the veils, very much so. Not getting stuck in the underlying causes, truly transcending those causes, and fully recognizing all of the various causes. That there is no effect in causes, that causes are not the true agents, that causes are as powerless as you are, and that the reason Allah creates causes is to test His servants, to teach and make known His names, and again, for other unknown wisdoms, Allah arranges this world through causes, but there is no real effect or power in the causes themselves. That there is none. We know this not just with the knowledge of certainty, but even with the truth of certainty. So it means that the causes we see are also powerless, poor, and weak, just like you. They have no ability to do anything on their own. Therefore, attributing these extraordinary works, events, arts, and so on to causes that do not see, do not know, do not hear, have no knowledge, and are powerless and weak is a constant mistake, a constant error. It is always false, always baseless. Yes. In other words, the real issue is the purpose. How can a person kill his own mortal self before dying? That is, before dying, a person should do this. Once again, we have so much to do. Even those who used to help us are not here now. We are living all by ourselves. On one hand, food, on another, tea, on another, lessons, and on another, when it comes to cleaning, it just never works out. So, how can a person die before actually dying here? Maybe we are not equal to this, or perhaps we can handle whatever else there is. In other words, truly die before you truly die, so that you may ultimately attain boundless joy and profound relief. This profound concept allows for a deeper understanding of existence. The point here is a person's imaginary self, their supposed existence, and what we call ego or self-importance. That is, a person thinks they exist, but this assumption is wrong. In other words, he assumes his own existence. Because a person's existence is not eternal, he is also created. Because he is created, it is through the Creator's power, will, nurturing, lordship, and seeing. Because he is directed and managed, the true Master, Lord, and owner of this existence is not himself, but the one who created him. However, he has given man a will. He has given a partial will. He has given a limited choice. But in this will, there is no creation or effect. In other words, when man was created, he was created as a whole. The creation of man, the bringing of man into existence from nothingness, the event of death, the beginning of creation, the body and what is within it, the matter of life, the matter of the soul, physical senses, spiritual senses, memory, imagination, love, fear, and other feelings, the matter of memory, feelings, and subtle faculties. In other words, man as a whole was created from nothing. So don't look at events with prejudice. Don't look at them blindly. Don't make decisions blindly of truth and events. If you look at things impartially, seriously, and with advice, the event will be understood. That is the creator of man. Man is a work, man is an art. But whose art could this be? Now on earth we see atoms. Atoms, of course, are mindless and without light. They cannot create that art. We'll get to that later. So, what is Dirt Kaya here? Never mind about publishing it now, just forget about it. Imagine that you are here with us and we are having a lesson. I mean, we are having a philosophy class here. We are having a class. Just forget about it, really. Pay attention to the matter at hand. This can't be done with money or anything like that. In other words, whoever is a person's Lord, that is whom they should prostrate to. Soil cannot be God. Water cannot be a deity. So, what would happen then? Water would be a creature of the deity. It would be something that was created. Something created just like you. Because it is powerless, it cannot possibly be God. Water is like that, soil is like that, air is like that, and sunlight is like that too. In other words, the four elements. We call this the kulya, the whole in between. That is, processes take place within these. The act of creation happens within them. The four elements. It's not outside of these. Soil, water, air, and sunlight. But in these four elements, there is no seeing, no knowing. They're not like humans. It's not as if these could come together and create a human, a plant, or a flower. Keep going according to your own reasoning, not by rote memorization. So, even if you personally do not prostrate yourself here, you absolutely have to accept the profound truth that these four distinct entities were indeed placed here by the divine will of God. This is because, fundamentally, no being in existence is truly eternal. The creation of the four elements and the creation of humans and animals within these four elements. That is your mother, your father, your relatives, and you yourself. As we said in other lessons, the most important matter here is the human being. For this entity called human to be eternal, a human's lifespan would have to be infinite. Isn't it wrong to say that a human who does not have an infinite lifespan, who has a limited age, who was created from nothing, is eternal? How old are you? Let it be 30, 50, or 100. 5 centuries, 10 centuries, 100 centuries, 500 centuries. It's still a limited number. Before that, there was absolute non-existence. That is nothingness. It's the same for other beings as well. It's the same for air too. So the idea that matter is eternal is false. And it is wrong. So it means that other beings as well as humans are created from nothing. Their appearance shows it well. It shows a drop of water. It shows the four elements. In other words, the four elements are being directed here. The four elements are like employees here. Like employees who obey their supervisor. So there is a need for the management of all four elements here. Something that is created cannot create another thing. A created thing is powerless and needy. First of all, it itself needs to be created. Before something created was created, it did not exist. Something that does not exist needs to be created. Something that is created cannot make another thing. After something is created, it still needs its life to be sustained. The fact that a human is brought into existence from a drop of water is one thing. The fact that this person who was brought into existence has their body maintained regularly every second is another. I mean, we keep saying this all the time. We made the car. A car cannot exist on its own. Someone who knows, someone who hears, someone who owns everything after making this car does not just leave it unattended. The car goes, works regularly, does shopping, goes here and there. Even after the car is made, it still needs to be directed and controlled regularly by someone who knows. A human is not created and then left unattended. After being created, the atoms in this body are still maintained in an orderly way. Not just every second, but every moment. So now, what was in a drop of water? In old terms, we call it a particle. In modern terms, we call it an atom. The meaning doesn't change. Call it ABC if you want, or Z if you want. The meaning is the same, only the expression is different. Whether it's called a particle or an atom, it's still small, still tiny. Names change, but the meaning doesn't. So even 10 centuries ago, there was still earth, there was still water. So the passage of time didn't change that soil. Soil from 100 centuries ago is still soil. There is a change there, but that change doesn't ruin the soil. Old soil, new soil. It's still soil. Here, soil doesn't become something different. Water is still water. Air is still air. So here, the creation of the four elements and the creation of living beings within these four elements. So what exists within these four elements? Everyone knows that there are particles. Water molecules, air particles, the particles of atoms in the soil, and the particles in the sun and in light. These are the four elements. In other words, saying there is no intelligence in a glass of water means that none of the atoms in that glass of water possess intelligence. If the atoms in a glass of water lack intelligence, then the atoms in the sea also lack intelligence, no matter how much water there is. None of the water particles have intelligence, sight, knowledge, or hearing. Beings that do not know, see, or hear cannot act in an orderly manner, and it needs to be managed, directed, corrected, and regularly stimulated. In other words, if water is not constantly preserved in its current state, it can deteriorate. It could become a poisonous liquid. It could become meaningless water in its current state. Not just every second, but every moment. If it is not truly preserved, it cannot continue to exist as water itself in its original form. Again, there is no intelligence in a piece of soil either. Again, there is no seeing, no knowing. If a piece of soil has no intelligence, then all soil is the same. It's the same thing. So, what happens then? Soil also needs to be managed. Now look at the air here. A cubic meter is the same thing again. So, look, what is happening here? So, soil, air, and sunlight as a whole are blind, deaf, lack intelligence, and have no will. It is impossible for four elements that have no will, cannot see, and do not know to come together and create a plant, a living thing, or a human being. There is a need for their creation, for the creation of the four elements, and after creation, for them to continue as soil, water, air, and light, for their nurturing and preservation. However, within these four elements, there is a second invention, a second creation. That is, the creation of soil here is a perfect event. But something that has been made cannot make something else. The second cannot make the third. In other words, all of them need to be created. For example, here we have a landscape. We made a landscape. The first landscape is side by side. The first landscape, the second landscape, the third landscape. Just because these are side by side doesn't mean one made the other. The first made the second. The third, five, this doesn't work. In other words, all of them were made side by side, drawn. They were turned into a picture. So here, miracles are one after another. Inventions are one after another. They are in a chain, but it's not possible for one to make the other, because all of these are equal in incapacity, weakness, helplessness, and ignorance. Since all of them need to be created, managed, and have their existence sustained not just every second, but at every moment of need, it means that these beings are managed at every instant by a creator whose will is incorruptible, whose knowledge is incorruptible, who acts without intention, whose power and might are without intention, who is ever living and ever seeing, and whose attributes are infinite. All these beings, by the necessity of their luminous nature, are governed simultaneously at every moment, just as he governs you. But if you start by considering yourself and understanding yourself, it becomes easier to understand the existence of other beings. Just as you were created, so were the other beings created. So, who could be your creator here? Whoever brought you into existence from nothing, it is he. For example, it is said here that man was created from a drop of water. What is inside a drop of water? There are atoms. What does a drop of water show about a human being? It shows the summary, the essence, the project, the program, and the plan. There is no intellect or understanding in the atoms within a single drop that could appreciate or execute the project or plan of a human being. So, attributing it to those atoms is as incorrect as the number of atoms themselves. Therefore, whoever created man from that drop of water, after creating him, brought him to, say, 1 year of age, 1 day old. How old are you? 1 hour old. How old are you? 1 minute old. He made him into a human being. After making him into a human, he cannot be left unattended, because a human is not like a stone. Even a stone would not exist if its atoms were not preserved. It is preserved in a static state. But let's accept it that way. But that's not really the case. So, what happens then? There are particles, atoms in this body. Just as the atoms in your hand have no intelligence, none of the atoms in any part of the body have intelligence. The atoms working in the eye do not have the ability to see. The atoms working in the eye do not have the abilities to see, to know, or to hear. Look, the act of seeing is something different. The particles in the ear also do not have the abilities to see or to know. It's the same with the teeth. All the other parts are the same as well. So then, what is the number of atoms in a human? It's X number. These atoms, in the amount of X as a whole, are without intelligence, without power, and without consciousness. They are unconscious, do not understand meaning, do not understand knowledge or science, and are not even aware of themselves. It is not possible for these atoms to make this body work in a systematic, orderly, and regular way. To accept this would mean accepting as many superstitions as there are atoms. So it means that these atoms are being directed. They are being directed, arranged, and operated by someone who knows. It is being operated, and by being assembled, the human is created, and the parts of the human are created. But a human is not made up of just the physical body. They also have emotions. While creating the human, the mind is also created. While creating, memory is created. While creating, imagination is created. While creating, life is created. While creating, love is created. In other words, with his emotions, his inner self, and his body, the human has been brought into existence from nothing. And this shows that the knowledge, will, sight, hearing, power, and might of his creator and maker are such that he simultaneously has control over all the atoms in a human, operates them at the same time, and directs them all at once, as required by his lordship. That is, here, the program of the particles working in the eye is different. The particles working in the eye. How many are there? As many as their number. But that working system is different. If the working system of the eye were in the ear, then that ear would become an eye. And if the working system of the ear were in the eye, then that eye would become an ear. In other words, each part has a different meaning. The hand is separate, the eye is separate, the ear is separate, the tooth is separate. All the parts are separate. All the parts must be known. And within these known parts, the atoms must be arranged and stimulated according to the program of each part without disrupting the meaning of those parts. This must happen at every moment so that the eye remains an eye at all times. The ear remains an ear at all times. And all the parts, including the most superior of them, can continue their life and existence at every moment. So, it means that with the manifestation of his knowledge and the manifestation of his power, Allah is in control of all our atoms and particles at every moment. And at the same time, he causes different actions, deeds, and functions to occur so that this body, this system, continues to exist. Just as he preserves our material being, he also preserves us with our spiritual being. If my mind were not preserved, everyone would be insane. All people could have been created without intellect. They could have been created without memory. They could have been created without life. Willpower might not have been given. Love might not have been given. Life might not have been given. The soul too might not have been given. Other senses might not have been created. So you, with your exterior and interior, with your outward and inward aspects, with your senses, have been brought into existence from nothing. And by your creation, you demonstrate the infinity of the Creator's knowledge, the boundlessness of his power, the limitlessness of His might, the infinity of His will, the endlessness of His seeing and knowing, and the countlessness of His attributes. Thus, this human being becomes a witness, a sign, a proof, and an evidence for both the existence and the attributes of the Almighty. In other words, you are a mirror to Allah. You are a mirror to your owner, a witness, an evidence, a sign, a proof. Do you want a miracle from Allah? Then just look at yourself, you mindless fool. Still asking for a miracle. You mindless fool. Still asking for a miracle. I mean a clear water, a river, a very sweet water. He is still searching for water while inside the water. He is about to die of thirst, searching for water inside the water. In other words, you have been placed inside the miracle. This miracle is this house, the cell. In other words, cell also means a small house. Fact in meaning, cell, a house, a narrow place. That's what it means. In other words, you have been placed in this house, this tent, this building, this place. He created you both outside and inside. Now, as we said a little earlier, there is an ego in man, a sense of self. There is an imaginary personality. He said, abandon your personality. So this I, whose is this I? Is this I yours? No, it isn't. This I is assumed. Who created it then? This I belongs to Him. In other words, I am not the owner. I am not the owner. Look, here you are, a miracle, a work of art, an act, a craft. You are a divine creation. You are the creation and the work of your Lord and your God. And what happens is, He created you in the form of a human being. And after creating you, He has protected you at every moment and brought you to this day, this second, this very moment. If your appointed time of life continues, He allows it to go on. But at some point, He will put an end to this life. Before that happens, know yourself, understand yourself. Understand so that you may prostrate yourself to your Lord with your entire being. With your limbs, your heart, your body, your feelings, your imagination, your soul, your life, your memory, your imagination, with your entire being, so that you may prostrate yourself to your Lord in a vast, pure, and all-encompassing way. Prostration, so that you may cry out, "Glory be to my Lord." Or the act of producing contemplation. Look for yourself, know for yourself, read for yourself, pay attention for yourself, reason for yourself, contemplate for yourself. But seriously, there is no meaning in living like an animal. If one does not prostrate to their Lord in this world, does not fulfill the proper way, then of course in the end, the result is dire, ruinous punishment. But this punishment is temporary. So, we mentioned the ego. We mentioned desires. And also arrogance. That is, a person's imaginary false self. Who are you? I am me. You cannot be me, and I cannot be you. In other words, for you to truly be me, your existence will have to be eternal. If you were eternal, you could say, I am, but since you are created, this I does not belong to you. This I belongs to someone else. Who created it then? In that case, whoever created this I, you must prostrate your sense of self to Him. That is why you will bow. You will go into ruku, bowing in prayer. Otherwise, you will see a limited life, a short time, 60 or 70 years. As we said earlier, before you die, you must kill your own self. Die before you die and make yourself die. In other words, here, abandon that imaginary identity of yours. Destroy your independent existence. This I is not permanent. So accepting it as permanent is a deception. This I continues to exist, but only because it is preserved by the Creator's guidance. It continues thanks to His protection. If He doesn't sustain you, you do not exist because He is the one who created you from nothing. Therefore, it means that the preservation of every second of your life belongs to God. So, if He does not preserve you at every moment, this speech, this system, this appearance, this life, this comfort, this order, all of these are absolutely impossible. So, what should a person do? That is, fulfill their obligations. But while fulfilling those obligations, one should remember that it is Allah who preserves me at every moment. He preserves me every second. He gave a life of 70 years, for example. Now turn those 70 years into days. Turn those days into hours. Turn those hours into seconds. Turn those seconds into moments. And I say, prostrate as many times as there are moments in your life. If, while making that prostration, you say, Subhana Rabbi al-Ala, with this intention, all those intentions are accepted as if you had actually performed them. So, for a person to be a comprehensive servant with his intention, to be a broad servant, to be a pure servant, depends on his intention. But this intention must be made while fulfilling the obligatory act, and it must be done during the obligatory act. However, this intention cannot be made outside of the obligatory act. Otherwise, that intention is not considered an intention within the bounds of the obligatory act. Within the bounds of the obligatory act. That is, a person is making a prostration. But if in that moment his intention is such that even if there were millions, trillions of Mehmets, as many as the atoms in his body, as many bodies as that, I would still offer all of them in prostration at that moment. This intention is considered an extra act. Even to the extent of saying, let there be as many bodies as the number of atoms in the universe, and let me prostrate to my Lord, to Allah, with all those bodies. Because this intention is considered an act, a person can attain the reward, virtue, and merit of a worship that would normally take a long time in a very short period, and thus become worthy of eternal happiness in the abode of paradise. But the opposite is also true. If a person does not fulfill this quality, is there any need to say more? Either eternal reward or eternal punishment. So what does punishment depend on? On not fulfilling the command. What does happiness depend on? On fulfilling the command. The obligation is clear. The reward is also clearly stated. So what does this begin with? It begins with contemplation. If a person pays attention and knows himself, he will not neglect prayer. He won't sometimes perform it and sometimes neglect it. Because he is the master, the creator, the mover, the Lord, the master and commander of the universe. The absolute commander, the absolute powerful, the absolute protector, the absolute loving, the absolute effacer. He who is named with 1,001 names. Do not prostrate to the creator of the heavens and the earth, and to Allah with a sincere intention. Here is the kiss of Rushun. Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. And prostrate. Subhana Rabbi. God Almighty has promised heaven to these people. This is the status of these people in heaven. Of course it's different. Yeah, so we'll get there. So there were curtains between us and Allah. There were veils. Now there is fatigue. I mean, there is capacity. And the body is tired. But here the heart is not tired. The form is tired. The body is tired. Should we continue in a bit? Or should we say a few more related things? So faith will increase. Faith will reach perfection. In other words, we will fulfill the duty. So how do we attain peace? Who are the most peaceful people? They are the messengers. Below them are the prophets. Below them are the saints. And below them, it means a people with perfect faith. So what does peace indicate? It means that by knowing Allah, by contemplating His works and actions, by disciplining the self, by abandoning desires, by breaking the dominance of the lawful, by staying away from women, not that I want to say this specifically, but what is the greatest veil, the greatest obstacle, the dirtiest barrier, the most powerful hindrance to Allah's knowledge and love for us in the hereafter? Staying away from women. Keep your eyes, your ears, your limbs away from women. This is the barrier to divine love. This is the barrier to knowledge of Allah. You must discipline your soul. We say the greatest obstacle between us and Allah is the self. But in reality, if the self is mixed in, it is the woman. The enemy inside is the self. The enemy outside is the woman. You have two enemies. The obstacles to your Lord's love are the self within and the woman outside. If you fight against these, there will be no one in this world or the universe more at peace or more content than you. Those people have disciplined their souls. They have passed through the veils. They have become mature, purified. Their souls have united. They have become sanctified and have reached a discerning state. Their emotions have matured and developed. They have become a true servant of Allah. Their essence has expanded. Thus, they have become a perfect human being. May Allah grant us the company of the perfected ones in the hereafter. May Allah gather us with the perfected ones on the day of judgment. Amen, O Helper. Yes, that's all for now, congregation. If there is anything else, you can write it down. The conversation is over for now. That's all for now. The conversation will continue. It is not clear when it will be. In other words, we are dependent on a divine state. If we try to schedule lessons according to our own plans, it doesn't work when they become official. But if a divine state manifests, Allah makes us speak. That is, إِنَّ لَا مُؤَسِّرَ فِي الْكَوْنِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. What does it mean? Surely, in existence, there is no effective agent other than Allah. In other words, there is nothing but the manifestations of the effective one. Either the true effective one or the absolute effective one. Or the effective and the opponent. Or the effective and the receptive. That is, the effective is also one of the names of Allah.